The Grim Tale of Grace Macabre, Chapter 58. For a confused moment, everyone stood still, sizing up the situation. The runaways watched Ari, awaiting his direction. Grace and the detectives watched the runaways, trying to anticipate their next move. Grace and Sarah couldn't believe that Detectives Martin and Quill were here with another female detective. Jeff and Jacob couldn't believe that they were in a room full of real monsters, and nobody seemed to understand how Detective Madison knew the runaways. Sarah pushed the lily thing away from her. It fell onto its belly and skittered back, just out of arm's reach, yet still within striking distance. Jeff and Jacob slowly moved in separate directions, trying to maneuver into better firing positions. Ari seemed to not care about the unexpected arrival of the detectives. He continued to smile down at Grace. It was a perverted smile, full of lascivious intent. It sickened her. He flicked out his forked human tongue at her. Salome and Amy continued to chant over Cindy, but now only in hushed tones. Then Neffy, still nude, began to moan and sway, making seductive gesticulations as she raised her hands above her head. "She's a succubus!" Sarah yelled. "She's working her magic on the room, trying to put us under her spell. Everyone look away!" Grace could feel desire well up from deep within. She was confused at this feeling. She knew she had to kill Neffy, but her eyes were drawn to Neffy's curves, the swell of her breasts, her long dark hair. Grace realized she was not seeing Neffy in her true demon form, but instead saw her as a voluptuous goddess. She shook her head to clear it of the spell. She finally tore her eyes away and saw that Quill and Martin were falling under Neffy's spell. They had lowered their guns, eyes full of lust as Neffy moaned and swayed before them. Barba saw his chance and raised the dagger higher, preparing to stab Cindy and finish the ritual, but Detective Madison fired off a shot, hitting his forearm. He dropped the knife, hissing in pain as black blood dripped from the wound. The shot broke Neffy's passion spell, and Quill and Martin each fired a shot at Barba, bullets slamming into his chest, knocking him off his feet. Sarah rushed at the lily centipede thing, bringing the tire iron down onto its head. Lily's human flesh apparently covered a hard chitinous shell. The iron made a crunching noise as it punctured through, and brown, gooey mucus oozed from the gaping wound. When Sarah pulled the iron from its head, it fell in a heap, dead. Sarah then rushed toward Neffy, who fixed her with a hate-filled look. They locked up in a grapple, Neffy trying to bite Sarah. Salome let out a long, rage-filled hiss and rushed over to pick up Barba's dagger. Jeff shot her in the head, knocking her back. Jacob shot Amy in the chest, making her stumble. Both demons turned toward the detectives and let out furious hisses. The detectives were clearly shocked that the wounds they had inflicted on the demons had not been fatal. Salome had black blood seeping from a hole in her forehead. It oozed down her red-scaled snout. Amy stripped out of her cloak, revealing a human form covered in pale white scales, 2 seeping wounds in her chest. Her long neck arched up, her head snapped around and fixed Jacob with a hateful stare. Then Amy and Salome fell upon Quill and Martin with a fury. Amy ripped open Jacob's chest, and Salome snapped Jeff's neck. Barba scrambled toward the dagger. Madison jumped off the bar and ran at him. She reached him just as his hand snatched the handle, and he stood. She shot him 3 times in the chest, but Barbara laughed as if he were having fun and kicked at her. Sarah got loose of Neffy and ran toward Barbara, ready to exact her revenge. Neffy was right on her heels. Madison stepped back from Barbara's attack, turned and shot Neffy, slowing her down. Sarah screamed as she raised the tire iron, covered not only with the lily thing's blood, but her own. Her scream was not a cry of fear, but instead a cry of victory. She plunged the tire iron down into Barbara's chest, piercing his black heart. She saw his surprise that the girl he had personally sacrificed to an evil god had returned to life and brought vengeance upon him. He clawed at the iron sticking out of his chest and drew a final, ragged breath. He dropped to the floor, dead. Sarah breathed heavily and closed her eyes for one somber moment as she savored her victory. She opened them, pulled the iron from Barbara's chest, and turned, prepared to re-engage her fight with Neffy. However, Neffy was gone. Instead, Andre rushed her, grabbing at the tire iron. Madison shot Andre, slowing his rush, giving Sarah enough time to bring the iron around and into his stomach. Andre gave an angry hiss, and Sarah pulled the iron free, allowing his lifeless body to collapse to the floor. She gave Madison an appreciative nod. They realized that the best strategy with these demons was for Madison to shoot them and distract them enough so that Sarah could use the iron to kill them. With this unspoken strategy, they set upon Amy and Salome, who were still ravaging the bodies of Quill and Martin. Grace stood defiantly before Ari. He looked at her, his serpentine gaze pornographic, and said, "I shouldn't have waited for you to give yourself to me. I should have just taken you." Grace bit back her disgust. "Yeah, well, your plan backfired," she said. "How so?" Ari replied. "You taught me about free will and the power that comes with choice," Grace explained. "Yes," Ari replied, shaking his head, his scales glistening in the candlelight. "And you chose the wrong side." Grace moved slowly to her right. He turned to keep her directly in front of him. She was hoping he'd fall for this, hoping she could get him positioned where his back was to Sarah and Detective Madison. She hoped if they survived their fight with Salome and Amy, that they could attack him from behind. "Did I?" she countered. "Once I found out what you really are, I would have resisted, and you would have sacrificed me anyway. At least this way I have a chance at survival." Ari flicked his forked tongue over his needle-sharp fangs. "But at least for a short time, you would have experienced so much life. I'd rather live a short life feeling every desire instead of a long life filled with mediocrity." Grace took another step to the right. Ari followed. "Mediocrity?" she replied. "So you think a life with a career, a family, someone you love is mediocrity?" Ari laughed. "Really, Grace? Just a few days ago you were terrified of such a life. Your family is broken, you live in a dead-end town with no real future, and your life before me was the exact definition of mediocrity." Grace kept her eyes fixed on his. Though she tried to use her peripheral vision to see how Sarah and Detective Madison were doing in their battle with Salome and Amy. The detective shot Amy 3 times in the chest, making her stumble, giving Sarah the opportunity to stab her in the back with the tire iron. Amy was now dead. Just Salome to go. But where was Neffy? "You're right," Grace said. "I had low self-esteem. I was hurt and confused and lonely. I felt there was no hope. You used that to lure me in, but now I realize it doesn't have to be that way, that there is always hope. What you offered me was death disguised in vanity and materialism." From the corner of her eye, Grace saw Salome knock the gun out of Detective Madison's hand. She turned and swiped at Sarah, knocking her off balance. Ari shook his head in disgust. "You are too stupid to understand that death is better than mediocrity. It's time I give you a final lesson, Grace." Grace took another step to the right. Ari did not. "And what would that be?" Grace asked, hoping he would just take one final step, which would put the detective and Sarah directly behind him. "That you're not as smart as you think you are," he said. Grace was hit from behind so hard that it took her breath away. The force of the blow sent her right into Ari, who grabbed her and held her tight. She was face to face with him. She looked deep into the crimson slits that were his pupils and was repulsed. "You thought you were maneuvering me into a vulnerable position?" Ari said. "You underestimated me." He grabbed a handful of her hair and yanked her around to see that it was Neffy who had hit her from behind. "We have been at this for thousands of years, you stupid girl. You can't outsmart us." Neffy was holding the sacrificial dagger. She turned and ran over to the table where Cindy was still tied, staring blankly up at the black-painted ceiling. Neffy raised the dagger and brought it down hard. A gunshot rang out. Madison had retrieved her gun and fired it at Neffy. The bullet slammed into her chest, causing her aim to be off. The blade sank deep into Cindy's arm. The girl was in such a state of shock that she did not even flinch. Detective Madison ran toward the table, gun raised, firing off more shots. 2 hit Neffy in the chest and shoulder. Another hit Salome in her scaly thigh as she lunged at Sarah. Salome faltered, falling to her knees. Sarah saw her opportunity and slammed the sharp end of the tire iron into Salome's back, killing her. She pulled it free and ran ahead of the detective toward the table, tire iron raised high. But Neffy turned and ran from the room through the front doors. They heard one final hate-filled scream from her as she ran into the night. Sarah stepped over to the child and gently pulled the dagger from her arm. The wound was deep, but the artery had been missed. She removed the rag from her own arm and tied it around Cindy's. She then moved from the girl and stood beside Madison, looking for a way to help Grace. Ari had his right arm around Grace, pinning both her arms to her side. He had a fistful of her hair with his left hand. He was so strong, holding her so tight that she could barely breathe. "Your family is dead," Sarah said. Ari hissed in reply. Suddenly, Grace had a thought. She still held the screwdriver, and she had some range of motion from her elbows down. She had been so intent on stabbing him in the chest that she had not considered that it was not the screwdriver, but Sarah's revenant blood that could hurt him. "I can still kill you, even if I can't make it a sacrifice," Ari said. He yanked her hair, twisting her neck to the side, exposing her carotid artery. He opened his mouth, clearly intending to sink his fangs into her neck. Grace used what little range of motion she had and stabbed Ari in the thigh with the screwdriver. It sliced deep into his leg. "Damn you!" he yelled, still holding her with one hand, yanking on her hair with the other. However, she could feel his grip loosen. She tried to stab again, but dropped the screwdriver. It fell to the floor, and he kicked it away. Ari leaned in to bite her throat, but she was able to twist at the last moment. His teeth sank into her shoulder. She screamed in agony. The bite itself was awful as it ripped into her flesh, but it also burned as if acid had been poured into the wound. She could feel a fiery sensation spread through her neck, down her torso. She began to sweat profusely as every nerve ending seemed to be ablaze. Her hands began to shake, and her knees were weak. A darkness crept across her vision. "His markings look like rattlesnake markings," she thought. "It's his venom that I feel." Ari pulled back. His mouth was filled with her blood. Madison took careful aim and shot him in the neck, causing his grip to loosen. He turned his head toward the detective and shot a stream of venom at her, barely missing her. Grace found the strength to twist the rest of the way around, now again facing him. As she turned, she caught sight of Sarah rushing over. She had retrieved the screwdriver and covered it with more of her own blood. Grace reached out and grabbed it from her. Ari quickly recovered. He still had a handful of her hair and yanked hard, forcing her to bare her neck. The pain eating through her body was agonizing. As he came in for the killing bite, she brought the screwdriver up between them and rammed it under his chin with enough power to force his mouth closed. Ari tried to scream but was unable to open his mouth. He tried to push away, but Grace used her left hand to cling to his crimson robe. She used her right hand to yank the screwdriver from his chin. Then she rammed it directly into his heart. Ari looked into Grace's eyes, his slit pupils widening in surprise. His grip on her loosened, and he let go of her hair, and his hands grasped at hers as she pushed the shank of the screwdriver deeper. She returned his look of surprise with one of righteous victory. "This is what free will looks like," she said, and pushed his lifeless body to the floor.